Okay, welcome back. We've covered earlier in our first lecture, we talked about different tools that are available to you and requirements that for this course. Just give you a general look, a course overview. And we're going to start today with the actual lectures from your chapter text. So let's look today at how to become a better listener. Very important to be an effective speaker. After that, we're going to talk about tapping into your audience and the importance of audience dynamics. And then we're going to look at what you start to do, the process of beginning to prepare for your first speech. So, listening. Let's look at that first. In order to become a more effective speaker, we need to be more effective listeners. And different cultures value listening in different ways. Sad to say that in American culture, we talk. It's a low context, and so we want to get to the dirt, we want to hear all the words. But listening and what's going on non-verbally, what's going on around us, is we don't put as much weight as other cultures, other societies do. But we need to learn from them because that's very valuable information that we're missing. Listening is one of the 9 interacting elements in the communication process. Obviously, we need first to have a speaker, a message, right, and a purpose. So speaker, having something to say, a message with a purpose in mind. Those are the first 3 elements. Choosing how we're going to deliver the message, the medium. Would it be via tape, like this is happening, via cable? Would it be by email? Would it be by telephone? So a medium, how are we going to send the message, the channel? And then the setting for that message. All of these things, these elements that interact with each other to make for either successful or unsuccessful communication. Now, the 6th element, which is the listener, by no means puts that listener as being down the ladder of importance. The listener is very important and is across from the speaker in this list that I've created for that reason. The response that the listener has to the message, any interference that is in place that is going to cause that message to be modified in some way or not have the import or the impact it should have. And then finally, what are the consequences of that message, of that communication opportunity? So those 9, and I will tell you now, those are on your exam in this course. So come back, look at that slide again, and I've kind of gone through them quickly, but each one of those interacts to create communication. Again, successful or not as successful. Listeners, when we look at our listeners, which I said is right across from the speaker, listener, listeners can either be intended or unintended. What do I mean? Well, right now you are sitting somewhere watching this tape or watching this cable broadcast. There are other people maybe walking by or come into the room. They were unintended listeners, but listeners nonetheless. Someone may overhear a conversation. Or how about this? Have you ever hit reply all instead of reply on an email and kind of wish you hadn't? Because now it has unintended. You didn't mean for everyone who received that initial email to see what you had to say. Okay, it's just me. I'm the only person who's done that. All right. So looking at our listeners, intended or unintended, we need to bear in mind that listeners have, number one, a specific frame of reference. This is their perceptions, their experiences that have affected how they're going to decode a message. So we encode a message intending this meaning. We know that we want this to be the message that our listener receives. But a listener must decode based on, this is my frame of reference, this is my knowledge, this is my perception, this is my experience. And in that, we can offend, or we can, kind of hit a bump and I don't understand. So we must keep in mind and try to build our messages so we accommodate or we allow for that decoding process the best we can. Second part of listening, which is either intended listening or unintended, is the value. And I've already mentioned this. There's a cultural effect that says, do we view listening as active or do we view listening as passive? Listening is an active part of communication, and here are some things. There are different phases we're going to look at, and we're going to see how we can improve our listening by concentrating on these phases and making them more active. But before we do, let's look at the components of listening to help us understand what's involved in effective listening. In the Chinese language, there's a symbol for the verb to listen, and it has 4 components. First, obviously, this is a no-brainer, undivided attention. Our listening is going to be better when we give our whole attention to something. Ears would be the second, to receive the message, to detect the sound and detect the words and detect as best we can the meaning. But this is interesting. The third component is the eyes. People see, and nonverbal elements, when I said about American society not paying as much attention as we should, other cultures, Asian for one, pays a lot of attention to the context, to what's going on around, what movements, what gesture, what facial expression, what's going on with the spoken word, because that's part of listening and understanding. And then finally, the heart. Interesting that the heart would be the fourth component of that symbol in the Chinese language. The heart indicates that we suspend judgment, that we listen empathically. That is a phase of listening. And in doing so, we strive to set aside our preconceptions, our biases, what we think we know, because most of the time, I know this, I know that. Well, okay, I thought I knew that. So the heart, being that fourth component, tells us or reminds us that we need to listen with as objectively as possible and as empathically as possible. So as I said, listening is a process. What are the phases? The first is the discriminative phase. Discriminative, I'll say that right. Hearing, that's an automatic or involuntary function. We hear. We detect sounds. And then we discriminate. The discriminative phase, we discriminate, is that sound or is that a word? Is that sound even carrying help? Is that carrying a message? So we discriminate. The next phase is comprehensive listening. Now we're doing this voluntarily. This is where we are looking to find meaning for the sounds. We focus on the message when we are comprehensively listening. We seek to understand the verbal and the nonverbal that's going on, and then we interpret within our frame of reference, that decoding I was talking about earlier. So if we concentrate, recognizing that we're in the comprehensive phase, and we concentrate on focusing on understanding, again, verbal, nonverbal, context of what's going on, and then interpreting, if we make an effort there, we're going to improve as listeners. Empathic listening, another phase of listening, and I've already talked about this. This is that heart, the heart of listening. This is encouraging your speaker to speak freely, to get to the dirt, to say what he or she really wants to say, because we have suspended judgment. Another phase is appreciative listening. Now this happens sometimes when just the beauty of a message. We don't really listen as closely or intently for, yes, we want the message itself, obviously, what the speaker has to say, but how beautifully it's framed. Years and years ago, I saw Sir Laurence Olivier receive an Academy Award, and people in the audience, his command of language was just unbelievable. And people in the audience, his peers, actors, directors, and producers sat there, and you could see visibly on their face, oh, gosh, that's just beautiful how he said that. Responding then to that's this beauty in the speaker's message, their eloquence. And this is very relevant, and we'll learn about this later in the course, in ceremonial or commemorative speaking, when we're marking an occasion or an event or a time with a ceremonial speech or a commemorative speech. So language, very important there. Let's move now to the higher level or the higher phase of listening. And this is really what we're in college to do. This is what it's for, to become critical thinkers. Well, in order to become a critical thinker, we need to be a critical listener. Listeners analyze in this phase. They evaluate in this phase the content. They inspect the reasoning that the speaker is giving. And they weigh what evidence the speaker has. You can understand, and you are the generation who's marketed to more than any other generation before you. You can't walk by the UC without being marketed to. You can't pass your television. Very little thing can you do where you are not in a marketing situation. So looking at what evidence is there, is that really good for me? Do I really need a credit card with 22% interest after the first 30 days? So when we're critically listening, we want to look at the relevance. We want to look at what we're hearing representative of what the speaker has said, representative of what he or she is encouraging us to do or sharing with us? How recent? Obviously, we want to look at the evidence. Is it recent? We want to look at that message. Is the content of that message recent, or is this something old hat? And sometimes, let me make a little bit of a little asterisk there on that. Sometimes, traditionally, tried and true, still today, sometimes that does give evidence weight. But we also want to know what's going on currently. We can't just stay stuck in 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever that is. And then things change, just like this course has changed. Reliability. That is another way, another thing that we analyze, we evaluate, we inspect. We want multiple sources. We want independent sources, sources who aren't tied together or serving some greater master. We want expertise. We want the credentials to show that the evidence that we're hearing has that expertise and is credentialed. So looking a little further at critical listening, know that it distinguishes when you are critically listening, applying that critical thinking, critically listening to a speaker. We want to know that the facts are verifiable. We're looking at that. We want to know that we want to be able to recognize and distinguish between a fact and an inference. An inference being where the speaker's making some assumptions. They may base it in fact, but are they starting to go off with and infer from that fact as opposed to having good solid support and proof? So is it incomplete in that way? And then finally, the opinions of the speaker. Are we hearing where personal judgments are being passed along? May start with a fact, but can lead to an inference, can lead to an opinion. And in that case, we have to weigh that accordingly and say, it started out pretty good, but I don't know that I can trust this opinion. I need more evidence. I need more support for that than just that word of that speaker. At the top of the heap of listening is constructive listening. When you reach this, you've surpassed even critical listening. There, you're going beyond that and searching for value in the message that your speaker has for you. So, and applying that, you're looking for that value and then applying it to your life. And so it truly has a life effect. And I think all of us have had more than one occasion where we heard a speaker and we were so moved or it changed us. It changed us. You hear someone say something and you were going in this direction and it either shifts slightly or it goes 180 or anything in between, because there's value in that and it has an effect, a lasting effect in your life. You extend the meaning as a constructive listener. You extend the meaning and you participate in the construction of the meaning when you do this. So constructive listening, the ultimate phase of listening. And that's what we seek to do. We seek to be critical listeners. We seek to be constructive listeners. But all the other phases, we seek to be empathic listeners. We seek to discriminate. We seek all these different stages, but all building toward being a constructive listener. We fight barriers, though, when we're listening. We all have them. We all have barriers. Physical noise. If you've been at this university for any length of time, you have been in a classroom that the message may have been thwarted a little bit or impeded by the fact there's bang, 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 hammer, 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 things going on around you. So physical noise is an impediment, a barrier to effective listening, to being an attentive listener. Message problems. Now, these are things where just how the speaker frames things. How about jargon? You get with just here this morning taping. And the people who do this, this is their bailiwick, they know what they're doing, and they know what they call things. They don't mean that to me. They mean nothing to me sometimes. So the jargon of an industry can be an impediment or a barrier to being an effective listener. So speakers, when it's your turn to speak, keep that in mind. It's never bad to kind of pepper what you're saying with a little bit of jargon, because then that really establishes your credibility. And it also establishes you as kind of the inner circle. You know what you're talking about because you have that experience. But if you get tech support and somebody just starts talking about all the inner workings of computers, hey, I just want to be able to do this. Can you tell me in plain speak how to do this? So be careful of jargon. That is an impediment, a barrier to listening. When a speaker is poorly organized, they were talking about this, now they're over here, they're down over there. You cannot keep up with what they're saying. It doesn't have a nice cohesive thread. And so that's going to be a barrier. You'll start to tune out because it's not making sense to you. And then finally, presentation problems, where your nonverbal effects. Facial, okay. Your facial expression can very often be a barrier to someone being interested or listening effectively to your message. No good, right? Reading to us. You want to speak extemporaneously. You want to plan. You want to rehearse. And you want to deliver as an expanded conversation. It needs to be in conversational tone. It does, the presentation, how you deliver something, is one of the greatest barriers to listening if you don't incorporate those things that make for a more successful presentation, a more successful communication opportunity. But the greatest barrier, and I know this is on your exam, so make sure you pay attention to this one. The greatest barrier to listening, the barriers are internal. They're inside of us. They're not physical noise. They're not presentation problems. They're not jargon or poor organization. They're inside of us. We can be inattentive. I like to call them little vacations that we take in our mind. Studies have shown that we speak at about 400 words a minute. I bet I challenge that a little. But we listen at 800 or 900 words a minute. So what does that tell you? That you can hear everything I'm saying, and then you can, okay, I've got all that, and you have another full amount of time in that minute that you can go off and take a little vacation. Oh man, I got to remember today after I leave here, I need to go. Oh, you know who I didn't call it? Now you see, your listeners off thinking of other things. And it's our job as a speaker to bring them back in, to keep them tuned in. But we all fight the internal barrier of taking these little vacations in our mind, this inattentiveness. And we're all guilty of that. Bad habits, that's another, where you feign attention. You act like you're paying attention. Oh, have we all done this? My husband will be telling me about his shopsmith he just purchased and all the tools that are on it, and it's got a lathe and it's got a bandsaw and it's got and this and this and this. And I was there, you know, especially hearing the price tag, I wanted paying attention to that. So I'm there, but I start to, hey, and he thinks I'm listening and I'm just captivated by his woodshop tools, and I'm not. So we all feign attention under certain circumstances. Receiver apprehension is another internal. Remember, these are the greater barriers. Another internal barrier that we have. So what's receiver apprehension? You're at your job. Here's an example. You're at your job and your boss comes by at your desk or your workstation and says, I need to see you. Don't leave the day without coming to my office. Oh, I'm having a great day the rest of the afternoon, right? So being apprehensive about what communication is going to take place. Actually, as it turned out, it might have been that you're going to get a raise. But that's not what we're thinking. We're thinking, well, how come I have to go see her or him? Another internal barrier are trigger words. Now, these can be positive or negative. What do I mean? Let me give you an example of a positive trigger word. And when I say it's an internal barrier, what I'm saying is we get so caught up in the trigger word that we're no longer listening. We're not hearing. We're not weighing the evidence. We're not thinking critically. We're not listening critically or listening constructively. A positive trigger word, when the little rover, Spirit, little rover Spirit that NASA sent up to Mars was roving around, there was damage when it landed or disengaged. And so and if you read in the paper about, or you watched a news broadcast, Spirit is ailing. Little Spirit is ailing. Well, they had another rover named Opportunity that was up there, and they were programming it to go over and help little Spirit. And we were, come on, little Spirit, let's go. It became very Americana in saving this poor little victim. It's machinery, people, but it took on, was that personification? It took on a very human type and was referred to that way in the news reports. So we were kind of swept away. And, you know, NASA remains debated in our culture, remains debated in our society. You know, good that we're spending all this money on shooting things into space. Waste of money that could be used to help poor, help the needy, help the hungry, help the planet. So we have this constant debate. Well, in that case, NASA kind of benefited from the way those trigger words that were being used with poor little Spirit. A negative, I don't have to tell you about that. We've all heard words that I'm not listening anymore because you used a negative trigger word. But we all, you know, we know the obvious ones, but everybody can have their own set. For me, when I was younger and I worked in the legal field and worked for an attorney, and he would say to a client, I'll have my girl. get us that. Oh, my girl will get us some coffee. I'll have my girl make those copies. It reduced me. It diminished me. And I didn't like it. Now I'd pay somebody to call me girl. But so you see different trigger words and how they can derail. You were listening, you were paying attention, you were getting the message. It was all good. But this internal barrier cropped up and you no longer were tuned in. Finally, an internal barrier is in our attitudes, where we have biases that block our comprehension of a message. Our attitudes about certain subjects, our attitudes about certain speakers, certain people. And so you can see that we fight. And if you think you have no biases, I will post on the Vista website a little electronic tool where you can actually gauge if you do or don't. So, but our biases act as a barrier, and we need to set aside, again, our preconceptions, what we think we know about someone or about a subject matter, and then we're able to listen. We're able to take this internal barrier and put it aside so we have the opportunity to be a good listener. When you are listening to speeches, you're critiquing. And that's not criticizing, that's critiquing. You're giving a form of feedback. Can be helpful, can be supportive, can emphasize strengths, but also emphasize the weaknesses in your response to those speakers. So remember, if you're listening to a speaker and when you're the speaker, the audience is providing for you some clues. If you've got an attentive audience, then that audience in their facial expression, in their body movements, their nonverbal gestures, you're going to be able to see, I've lost them. For whatever reason. I've lost them because this is too complicated. I need to go back and make this clearer, make this plainer. I've lost them because it's just boring. I need to fix this. And you make those on-the-spot adjustments as a speaker. But critiquing speeches, you're giving this feedback. And you're doing it whether or not you're actually filling out feedback information, giving a formal critique, but just in your listening in that audience and your response to that listening. While we're talking about critiquing, you will critique speakers in this course. You will critique peer speaker, and you'll critique guest speakers. That will be, their videos are streamed and will be uploaded to the Vista website, the course website. You'll view them. But here's the criteria, and you'll want to go back and look at this over and over again to know, what are you judging? How do you judge the effectiveness of a speech? You judge it by overall considerations, such as the commitment, the adaptation to that specific audience, purpose, freshness, the ethics of the speaker. If you don't see those things, then obviously, and there should be evidence of all of those things. Substance, obviously, is it a worthwhile message? Structure, was it easy, is it cohesive and orderly? Was it easy to understand? And then the presentation, simple, the delivery of it, simple, direct, concrete language, short sentences. We don't want to hear a whole diatribe when we're listening to a message. Natural, enthusiastic, responsive delivery. So your audience knows that you are invested in them. Your audience knows that you're committed to them. They see these things. All of these things are the way you're going to critique speeches, but also will be critiqued in this class. So Chapter 1 in your electronic text, you're going to have this figure 4.5, and it's going to give you these guidelines and expand on those, the guidelines for evaluating speeches, so you can perform that function and also know and prepare for your own speeches where you'll be critiqued likewise. So, are you listening? We're going to move on now to Chapter 2, second part of the second lecture, adapting to your audience and your situation. Since we're talking about audience. The first step, you would think that the first step in getting ready to give a presentation is to, well, what am I going to talk about? It's not. The first step in effective presentation is to analyze your audience. Who you're speaking to is more important initially than what you're going to say, because what you're going to say is going to be tailored to who you're speaking to. So you want to analyze your audience. Let me take a moment to say right now that on that student survey, that mandatory, I can't stress it enough, mandatory student survey that you completed, should by now, completed in this course, we collected audience demographics. And then we'll post the results of those on the course website so you can see, this is my audience. So many of my audience, so many of them are conservative. So many of them are of this religious preference. So many of them commute to school. So many, and on. So many are this age. So many of this gender. So you have that, and then every time you get ready to speak, you pull out that audience analysis, those the results, and you say, "Let me see. I'm going to build certain things, and I'm going to eliminate certain things in my presentation in order to tailor it for this audience and get the best effect that I can." So audience dynamics, well, we'll talk about demographics in a moment, the kind that we'll collect in that survey and that'll be posted for you. But right now we're going to talk about the 4 elements of audience dynamics. Dynamics. What makes up an audience, how an audience receives, how an audience might be swayed this way or that way, persuaded this way or that way, receptive to this or not receptive to that. It's made up of 4 things, as I said. 1 is motivations. Secondly is an audience's attitudes. 3rd are the beliefs. And 4th are the values. So looking at each of those individually. Motivation. What we're motivated by. What does that mean? It's what we need. It's our needs. It's our wants. That motivates us. You know, I'm motivated to have lunch when these lectures are over because I will be hungry, I want this, I need that. So that motivates me to behave in a certain way. So explaining why we do what we do. This is, and I know this is on your exam, so very important here. Let me flag this for you. Never forget that people will listen, learn, and remember a message only if it relates to their needs, wants, or wishes. If you don't relate it to what they need, if you don't relate it to what they want, you don't relate it to what they wish for, they're not going to listen, learn, and remember. And remember is kind of the key word here. If you're listening to everything I say, because it's just so captivating, you're listening to every word I'm telling you, and you walk out of here, and I mean, you were there. We had successful communication, we had effective communication. You walk out of here, no matter how good I was and how effective a listener you were, 24 hours from now, you'll remember 50% of that, only half of it. And 24 hours after that, you'll remember half of that half. So my best shot in a perfect world is for you to remember a quarter of what I said within 2 days. So I better make that quarter effective. I better make that quarter memorable. I better make that quarter what I wanted you to know, what I wanted you to learn, what I wanted you to think. So that is very important when you're framing your message, knowing that 3/4 of what you're saying is gone within 48 hours. And that's best case scenario. There's a psychologist named Abraham Maslow, and he came up with this hierarchy of human needs, what we need, these 5 levels of needs. And we start at I think in your book you actually have a graph of it, but you start at the bottom, even though I've got it listed top down. Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts with just basic physiological needs. We need food, we need water, we need air, we need comfort. Well, hello, I'm a speaker. I can't provide any of that. You may be able to. You may determine that a room that you're going to speak in is dreadfully cold, and you may adjust the thermostat accordingly so your audience is more comfortable. Or it's terribly hot. They're not going to hear you because they're so uncomfortable in the heat. Food, yeah, probably no way to really provide that at in this particular class. But yeah, why do you think there's so many breakfast meetings, lunch meetings, dinner meetings? Your speaker, whoever's presenting information at that meeting or making a persuasive presentation at that meeting, is assured that his audience is not going to pay attention because they're hungry. So similar, comfort things, comfort issues. The second level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you'll need to know these, so remember where this slide is. Your second level is safety. People need to feel secure. And, you know, I go back to this every time. 9/10 of 2001, President Bush is addressing the American public. 9/12/2001, President Bush is addressing the American public. Same audience, same speaker. Same context? No. He was charged in that 9/12 speech right off the bat to say, we're okay, we're secure, we're safe. He had to assure his listeners of that, or they weren't going to hear a word he was saying. So safety is important. And the way you think of it in terms of a lesser stage than addressing the American public is you think in terms of always assure your audience, we all need this assurance, that we have control. We have control. We have decision-making power. Because if we take that away from an audience, they don't like it. Doesn't make them feel secure, doesn't make them feel safe. And now you're going to have trouble with that message that you want to convey. And the next level is our sense of belonging. That's our next need. Group membership. So this is identification. We want to identify with others. We don't like it, that old no man is an island. We don't want to be an island. So acceptance, friendship, we all need that. So in those cases where you can, remind us of our connection to each other in whatever way that is. The fourth level, we're getting near the top now. The fourth level is esteem. We need to feel respect, self-respect, and respect for others. We need to feel pride in our accomplishments, pride in who we are. Recognition. We need to feel that we're independent. As we age, that becomes a big threat. So independence, we assure that, and then our listener will hear us. So you see how important all these elements are in having your best communication opportunity. When you keep in mind, these are the levels of needs, getting to higher and tapping into those where it's appropriate, where it works for you in your presentation. Finally, self-actualization at the very top. This is where we want to realize our potential. We want to be challenged, and we want to be able to overcome those challenges. We want to grow, we want to develop. And we want to feel satisfied in our efforts and in our accomplishments. So all of these needs, extremely important to be aware of them, because as a presenter, as a speaker, you're going to want to use these to your advantage, but you're also going to want to use them just to have that great connection, because you have them too. You have these same needs also. So these are connecting, making things to keep in mind. Looking at our attitudes about things. Now remember, we're looking at the audience dynamics. First was the motivations. I've talked about that a great deal. But now let's look at the other part of that, the other three elements, which are attitudes, our beliefs, and our values, which make up our attitude system. Attitudes, hey, I like it, I don't. It's just feelings about things. Beliefs, I know this. I know these to be true. And then, as I said, we find out more often, I thought I knew that. I think I know that. And then our values. This is where, in a perfect world, this is how things work. This is what we look at as the ideal state of being. Students confuse beliefs and values on the exam every time. Believing something is not the same as valuing something. When we believe it is, I know it, I think I know it. Valuing is saying, if it worked ideally, this is how it would be. So, when a speaker can demonstrate, if he knows going in or she knows going in that the audience is going to be resistant to what he or she has to say, or not want to learn about a particular topic for whatever reason. I'll give you one. My brother if I were going to give him a presentation on light rail in Houston, I live near the downtown area, I love it. He won't even write on it. He won't even think about it. He don't want to talk about it. He won't hear about it. So his attitude, I've got a barrier right there. I can't even talk to him about, hey, why don't you come down, meet at the house, we'll grab the train and we'll go to a museum, or we'll go and have lunch, or we'll go do this. I've got to figure something out, because right off the bat I'm fighting that. But when a presenter can show an audience member, a listener, that his or her attitudes don't jive with their beliefs or their values, you got a chance to change their attitudes. You got a chance to be heard. So remember that if you know that your audience's attitude is going to be a barrier for you in your presentation. What other audience knowledge can we gain? Demographics, and that's what we're able to do for you in this course. When you complete that survey, again, we will post that, and you're going to be able to see things like the age of your audience. How many, age 18 or to 22, how many this age, how many that age. You're going to see the gender breakdown. And latest studies show we're getting up to 58-60% of your typical college classroom are females. So we have, I think it's about 5 years ago, started to outnumber the males. So there's a very good chance that your particular audience will be largely female. Education level, you want to know. In this case, obviously, we're all going to college if we're taking this course. But where are we in the process? Is that low? What classification and what majors? You're going to be able to see that, so you know. Group affiliations, what we belong to, our political, our religious, our social, and then finally sociocultural background. Culture has a great effect on an audience, and we're going to look at in just a moment about diversity in your audience and how you handle that, what kind of flags that sends up and challenges that sends for you, so you'll be more effective in recognizing and respecting the different cultures that you're speaking to. So, as I said, meeting the challenges of your audience diversity, which will be indicated when you see this audience analysis. Leave your biases, leave your stereotypes, what you know, what you think you know, your preconceptions, leave them at the door. And give your speakers and your audience the benefit of, I want to learn about you, I want to know about you, and I'm not coming in thinking that I already do. You want to eliminate isms. Sexism, ethnocentrism, what is that? That's a $3.48 word. It means that, kind of my way is the way. My culture, I come from this culture, and so everything else is compared to, everything else maybe falls just a little bit short, kind of ethnocentric thinking. You want to leave that at the door. You want to eliminate, obviously, racism, all of those isms that impede communication because they keep us from really learning from each other. They keep us from really being empathic listeners, listening with the heart. And then you want to eliminate marking. Well, what does that mean? I'm sure most of you took this course because someone said, oh yeah, take Professor Bridger, she's great. Okay, so in my brain. But it wasn't necessary when you started looking for a course and you started looking for a professor, was it necessary to say you want to take the white Professor Bridges? No. Now, would it be necessary if you were giving information to a policeman about someone running away from a crime? Yes. So marking is where you unnecessarily identify in a social or a cultural way a person's identification. All right, so you want to eliminate those. If you want to see attitudes, speaking of little audience demographics and audience analysis that you can do yourself, and you want to see first-year college students, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? I like it, I don't. Go to this website and you'll see a survey of first-year college student attitudes. This may be helpful to you in selecting the topic for your first speech in this class, the informative speech. We're going to close. I think this is getting close to the close of this particular chapter. We're going to look at what other knowledge you try to assess in that analysis, evaluation, preparatory information you're trying to gather in order to be effective when you choose your topic and develop your topic and give your speech. We're going to look at one other aspect, and that's our situational knowledge. What are the elements of our speech setting? What's the time of day? If it's early, or is our audience going to be sleepy or running and kind of come in frantic because of freeway traffic, that kind of thing? Is it late? Are they going to be tired? Is it going to be challenged to hold their attention because they want to go home? So, and also not just the time of day or the time of the week, but also how much time is allotted for your speech. You've got to know how long you have to talk or how long you only have these many minutes to talk so you can build in the really good elements so that's a successful presentation. You have a good communication opportunity. Where is it that the speech is taking place, your presentation? Where's that taking place? What's the occasion? I had to do it. I know that's what most are going to say. But what's the occasion for the speech? What's the size of the audience? I'm going to speak differently to 30 people than I am to 300 people. I'm going to speak differently to 10 people than I am to 100 people. So what's the size of that audience? Because that's going to build in. That's going to be something you're going to look at and then create certain things, maybe gesturing. It may be content. It's hard to have something interactive in a speech if there's 300 people there. You're going to use your time just distributing materials or helping explain it. But it's very easy if you've got a small audience to do something interactive. And how about the context of recent events or of recent speeches? I truly had, years ago when I first taught this course and informative speeches were being given, I had a student who was actually a nationally acclaimed fencer, fencing, the sport of fencing. And she competed all over the United States and won many contests, and she got up and informed us and even demonstrated fencing It was, and she had all the garb, and she had all the material, all the tools of the trade, as it were. And it was a great speech, and everybody learned a little about fencing. And she sat down, and the poor guy behind her, or who was scheduled to speak next, had chose fencing as his topic. A, what are the odds of that? And B, he'd never really fenced. He just wanted to tell us about what he learned about it. Now, there's nothing wrong with the second speech, just where it was in the speech order. So you can see that can have an effect on how effective you are. He actually gave a very nice speech on fencing, but he was so deflated knowing that here this champion had spoken before him. So, and also recent speeches. I'm sorry, that was a recent speech. Also recent events. My example of President Bush on 9/10, President Bush on 9/12. You can see that's the context has changed. So that's situation knowledge you need to have in order to be effective. Okay, 2 out of 3 done. We're going to move on to Chapter 3 now, getting ready for your first speech. This is kind of an overview because we will look at each of these over the next several weeks when we're going through lectures and we're going through the chapter text to get you ready. But let's just see the overview. When you're preparing to give your presentation, after, and I can't state this clearly enough or stress it enough, after you've analyzed your audience, after you have gained every bit of information you can about who you're speaking to and the circumstances of that speech, after you've done that analysis, then you're going to follow these 5 steps to get ready. And again, this is real broad stroke today. We'll get into more detail later. You're going to select your topic in light of who you know your audience is. You're going to focus or narrow the focus of that topic, which is choosing your main ideas. So that's all kind of one step. You select the topic and you narrow down so it can have the right focus for your speech opportunity. The second thing you'll do is select your supporting materials. The third is to select a speech design, and we're going to look at different ones that work for different types of speeches. And then you're going to outline your speech. And yes, in this course, you're required to turn in a formal, full, complete sentence outline with every speech that you give, because the structure of a speech is so important in the success of a speech. So we require that outlining, so you go through that process in order to have best organization, best cohesion, so your speaking will improve just by the fact that you've done this development phase of your speech. And then finally, practice presenting. If you do the other 4 steps and you never do the practice, as effective as the others are, it's going to show. The fact you haven't rehearsed is going to show by probably you'll blow your time. You stick to the time allotments. It's going to show by stumbling and bumbling around. It's going to show by being uneasy or look a little unknowledgeable, not as polished, and not as comfortable with the topic. By practicing, then that's going to be like putting on a favorite pair of jeans. When you get up to give that speech, you're comfortable because you've been over it several times. Now, that doesn't mean that you're memorizing it. Now, we don't want to see you read it off the back of your eyelids, because you're going to lose all this great nonverbal effect you could have. You're going to have nonverbal effect that shoots you in the foot. But practicing is going to smooth that presentation, and you're going to look so polished, and it's going to be so effective for your audience. So, speech preparation steps. When we're selecting our topic and narrowing that focus, then you're looking for a topic that's going to be appropriate to you and your listeners. Something you're interested in. Here's rule of thumb. If you don't care, we don't care. If you don't care about what you're talking about, there's no way we're going to care, and we're going to see it. Remember back when we talked about critiquing the different elements, the different standards for critiquing speeches? Well, right off the bat, speaker commitment. We're looking at speaker commitment. And so if we don't see that right at the outset, then your audience starts to fall away just by virtue of that. You want to narrow that topic so those main ideas are, get to the dirt kind of thing. Get to what you need to say. And then you have your support for it, and then you have your examples, and then you have your embellishments, your illustrations, whatever it may be. You do your add-ons after the fact, but you want clear structure and 3 strong main ideas. I recommend 3. You can maybe do 4 in a 4 to 5 minute speech, but 3 is really easy to handle. So up to you, but 3 good solid main ideas. When you're selecting those, you want to consider your purpose. Am I speaking to inform? That's one purpose for speaking. Am I speaking to persuade? That's another purpose. Am I speaking as commemorative or celebrating? Which am I doing? So you want to keep that in mind, because that's going to make a difference on which main ideas you select or which ones develop for you. So it's a clear idea of what you want to accomplish. I want my audience to think this. I want my audience to learn this. I want my audience to know this. So think in terms of the purpose when you're selecting main ideas. What's your interest and the knowledge you already have, the experience you already have, and the questions you have. What's your audience's interest? What can you anticipate they'll be interested in? What can you anticipate they may already know? What can you anticipate they need to know? I've said, for all the years I've taught this, the best way to start thinking about selecting your topic and developing that topic is not to stand as a speaker, but to physically walk in, sit as a listener, and say, what would I want to know about that? If I were hearing a speech on that subject, what would interest me? What would I be inclined to listen to? What would I feel like was a good investment of my time? And then time constraints. I can't stress that enough. In this class and all your speaking opportunities, you're going to face that you've got 15 minutes for this, you've got 30 minutes for this, you've got, in this case, 4 to 5 minutes. Between 4 and 5 minutes are the speeches you'll give in this class. Give you 30 seconds either side of that, but you start losing points if you don't meet that 4 minutes, which I think at 3:30, if you're under 3:30, or you blow your time and, at 7 minutes or 6, actually at 5:30, I think you start losing points. But, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, hey, you didn't rehearse because you had certain time constraints and you've not met them. So keeping all this in mind, and Chapter 5 in your text, we'll move on to that, has more on topic selection. So that's all I'm going to say about that now. For supporting materials, once you have your main ideas nailed down, again, what are the obvious questions that you need to answer? What are the obvious things that you need to relate about a subject? So once you've got those main ideas nailed down, you want to authenticate, you want to detail, you want to illustrate with facts and statistics, one form of support. And I'll tell you, in American culture, we regard facts and statistics as the highest form of knowledge. Other cultures, maybe not. Traditions, narratives, history that's handed down, storytelling, that kind of thing, may be valued more in other cultures. But here in the U.S., if you've got a U.S. audience, we're looking for that. We're looking for things that are verifiable. They are rooted in reality. The second type of support you may want to include, and you need support, so you got to choose from this list that I'm giving you, is testimony. This works very, very well in persuasive speaking, but also informative. Giving witness to ideas, credentialed witness. But there are 3 types of testimony, and I think there's more on this in Chapter 7, but suffice it to say, we have expert testimony, people that know because they've got all those letters after their name that means that they've studied that. They have experienced that. They have developed that. So I kind of think science kind of thing, or in the scientific field. Lay testimony, that's just somebody you trust. That's you. That's kind of Joe Everyman. In my case, I have a cousin. I trust her taste in wine. I trust her taste in music. I trust her taste in books. And I look to her to recommend things to me. She, for me, is a lay witness or gives lay testimony. And then finally, prestige testimony. And this is where a celebrity of some kind, a pop cultural hero of some kind, again, another lecture I'll get into more detail, but that just tells you there's different types of testimony to choose from. And some are more effective for certain speeches or certain information than others. The third type of supporting material are examples. This is where you illustrate, either using a brief or extended example, and that can either be factual or hypothetical. But I've given you several examples while I've been giving this lecture, because it's a moment where, okay, at first you can kind of get off the train. Oh, we get to stop and rest for a minute, but it underscores and reinforces what I've said, but in a different way. By giving an example, then it enriches the lecture, but it also gives us a moment to reconnect. So very important to use examples for illustration. And then the fourth type of support is a narrative. And it's going to sound like an example, only it tells a story, so therefore it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Most examples don't, but narratives, and they're very effective for introductions. Narratives work very well because it draws an audience in, the audience identifies with you as a speaker. Narratives have a lot of power for you to get that audience at the outset. Again, more on this in Chapter 7. Looking at our speech design, remember these are the steps we're going through in preparing for that first speech. Looking at speech design, that step, we're looking at the arrangement not only of a speech, but of the body of the speech. So design means two things. First, it means the arrangement of the speech itself. An introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Here's the rule of thumb. In the introduction, tell us what you're going to tell us. In the body, tell us. And in the conclusion, tell us what you told us. Well, that sounds real repetitive. Well, it has to be effective. Because if you fail to do that, then you're missing the opportunity for your audience to remember that 48 hours. How much are they going to remember 48 hours from now? That repetition is going to ensure that they remember the meat or the strongest content of that message that you wanted them to. So we've got the arrangement of the speech. Transitions we'll talk about later, where you build bridges for your audience to move from ideas to ideas. Very important, but we'll get into that in later lecture. But the arrangement of our ideas and the supporting materials, that's in the body. And here's where we choose a design, a speech design. Now here's 3 just general designs, but you'll see when we move later on to informative speaking, we move beyond that to persuasive speaking, there are specific designs to choose from for specific types of speeches. But to give you an example here at the beginning, say you choose a categorical design. That's one you can choose from. This is where you're arranging your ideas based on the principle of similarity. So I'll give you an example. If I were giving a speech about flags, which I'm going to use this one a lot in lecture, flags that flew over the Republic of Texas during the 10 years that Texas was a nation, and that's my background as a 5th generation Texan, then I would probably arrange that speech categorically. Because similarity, it's a flag and it flew during that time, it's a flag and it flew during that time, it's a flag and it flew. So I can arrange that speech that way because my main ideas are going to be those different flags, and I group them together on the principle of similarity. If, however, I wanted to present that same speech using a sequential or chronological design, or even a spatial design, I could do that. Sequentially, this one flew first, this one flew second, this one flew third. Same kind of thing. Chronologically, those kind of, in that case, mean virtually the same thing. They mean different things, and we'll look at that later in other speeches. Or spatial. Now this is really good, I'm going to get away from the flag thing for a moment. This is really good when you're doing a demonstration, how to use something. If I were to give you a speech on how to use a camera phone, then I would probably, having the phone this small to show that, you open the front, and here's how you engage the camera, and here's how you focus, and here, whatever it may be, I'm showing. While seeing the physical phone would be beneficial, having it blown up on a poster or an overhead, something like that, to really show the different parts in a very clear way would be better. But that's a presentation aid question or issue for later on. But the principle of proximity, how far away sequentially is something, how far apart in years, how far apart in events, whatever that may be. Chronologically, again, proximity to each other. This happened then, this happened now, this happened next. Spatially, how close together are these things physically on the object. So you choose the principle of proximity design, sequential, chronological, I'll get it in a moment. Spatial, you'll choose that design when you are organizing based on where things are in relation to each other. And then finally, cause and effect. Again, a general category. Something happened and it caused this. This is going on and that's what caused it. This is, for an informative speech, called where you are organizing your ideas based on closure. But don't make the mistake of closing beyond this caused this or that was caused by that. Don't go further and ask your audience to act in a certain way choose something, decide something based on what you're telling them in an informative speech, because now you're over in persuasion. And you don't serve two masters when you speak. You're either speaking to inform or you're speaking to persuade. So just don't get confused on that one. Chapters 4 and 8, we have more on speech designs, so we'll get to that then. Outlining, let me see, this is the 4th in the 5 steps of getting ready to speak. So when we outline, know that it serves as your blueprint. Just like if you were going to build a house, you need those plans. Well, in this case, if you're going to build a effective communication opportunity, you need to have plans. So you want to make sure that all 3 parts, remember, introduction, body, conclusion, all 3 parts are fully developed. You want complete punctuated sentences for your formal outline that you'll turn in. Know that that differs from a keyword outline. Keyword is something that you'll use that's like cue card. It gives you prompts so you know where you're going next, the progression of your ideas, where do you go next. But again, this is just a quick overview, more on outlining when we lecture on Chapter 9. Final step, practice, rehearsing. To manage your speaker impressions, number 1, how credible you come off. All right? Are you competent? Do you appear competent? You're going to tell us certain things in that speech that we'll know you're competent, and then we can be confident in you because you're going to build that into your speech. And you're going to practice delivering that so it's very smooth, very polished, and very believable. Do you have integrity? If a speaker, right now, there are people who are associated with Enron that cannot say anything. They cannot speak any truth, no matter how true it is, because their integrity has been impugned. So having that integrity, great benefit, because your audience will listen to you if they see that you have integrity. Your goodwill, and in this case I'm talking about identification with your audience. You don't want to, you want to maybe bring your expertise, you want to bring your own experience with something, your own knowledge of something, but not in a way where it says, I know and you don't. What you want to do is identify and relate it so to your audience that they recognize, your audience recognize that you're connected with them, that you're not all that different. And so that interest that you have will flow over and be interest that your audience shares. And then finally, your dynamism. In this case, we all know people who are just dynamic personalities. They're just out there, they're extroverted. You may not be one of those people, but you can be dynamic still because you can show that you're confident in what you're saying. You can show that you're decisive and not somebody, I can't make up my mind, I don't know. And you want to show your enthusiasm for your topic and enthusiasm for the opportunity to speak to that audience, that you truly are glad to have the opportunity to do that. And this then will translate as strong communication, effective communication. And then the other part of practicing, so you're speaking, and I kind of brushed over that earlier, speaking extemporaneously, planning and rehearsing. We're in the rehearsing phase now, but we've planned well and we are now rehearsing. You want to integrate certain things, your nonverbal effects, refine those effects so it all goes together to say the same thing. Studies have shown that when nonverbal and verbal don't agree, that an audience or a listener will believe the nonverbal over the verbal. I'll give you an example. I have several things that I want to do this weekend around the house. Honeydew stuff, as my husband calls them. And, hey, can we kind of hang out in town this weekend so we can get some things done? And he comes in and says, I got a bunch of the guys that are going to go play golf at that new course, yada, yada, yada. Can I, I was thinking I was going. It was okay with you? Yeah, sure, go ahead. What's he going to believe? What's he going to hear? He's going to see, shake my head no. He's going to, probably the whole time he's playing golf, I don't think she really meant it. But he'll probably go out the door anyway when he heard the yeah, sure. Okay. In this case, and as studies show, you will believe when nonverbal doesn't match up with what the speaker's saying, you're going to believe what you're seeing. So know that, and so therefore you want your nonverbal to illustrate the verbal. Okay, we're ready to take a break. That's chapters 1, 2, and 3, your second lecture. And when you come back, we're going to hit 4, 5, and 6, talking about speaking informatively, talking about finding your topic, and then finally how to research your topic. Okay, thanks.